My background. I'll try to keep this as brief and simple as possible. My wife and I have been married a bit more than 2 years. I came to this forum about a year ago when my wife was going out on 2 to 3 girls' night out a month. I began to suspect she was cheating. I got into her FB, emails, texts, and did not find any evidence of cheating, however. I did find evidence that, before we were married, one of my close friends had tried to start an affair with her. The evidence showed that my wife did not reciprocate the feelings. But she did not rebuff him, either. I did the full thing, no contact letter that I proofread, no more girls' night out, all passwords and access, etc. But I left one important step out. I did not contact the OMW. He did quit contacting my wife for the most part. He'd send the occasional email, FB message, but my wife would always be transparent about it. Then the messages fell off completely and we didn't hear from him for several months. In DEC 2011, he sent my wife a random FB message. She informed me and did not respond. He sent another in Jan 2012. Again, my wife informed me and did not respond. Finally, this past Monday, the 20th of February 2012, he escalated to texting her, telling her he loved her, etc. This time, I completed that one important step that I left out before. I contacted OMW. Background: me, my wife, other man and OMW had all been very, very close friends. Anyway, in the midst of this very long conversation with OMW, she tells me a few things that my wife had left out of the original D-Day a year ago. That she and my wife had gotten very drunk, and at the urging of other man, had kissed in their hot tub. I confronted my wife about it that night, Monday, and thus began the trickle truth. She told me that they had gotten sloppy drunk and had kissed. Neither of them found it enjoyable and only did it at the urging of the other man. I firmly told her that continually hiding things from me was unacceptable, and that if she continued to do so, we would not stay together. She was very sorry. She hid her face from me and cried almost the entire night. The next day, yesterday, during a phone conversation during our lunch breaks, she admits that she also kissed 2 different girls while she was a freshman in college. I'm more upset at this point because I see that she's been hiding things from me for far longer than I'd originally thought. So, all day yesterday these things are going through my head. I decide when I get home to have another come to Jesus talk with her. We'd already had one on Monday night when I found out about her kissing the OMW. I explained to her that she had this one opportunity to tell me the full truth and that if I ever found out differently, that would be the end. No questions asked. She became very distraught, very emotional, and she's crying again. I could tell that she wanted to tell me more, but that she was very afraid. I encouraged her to open up. She eventually admitted to me that after she kissed OMW, other man eventually went inside. After that, she and OMW went down on each other. She said that neither of them enjoyed it and both immediately regretted it. She's crying hard at this point. I'm holding her, telling her that I'm not happy with what she's telling me but that I don't hate her or judge her. She starts crying harder, and I ask her if there's more. She says yes. She then starts sobbing so hard that she's shaking, and in between sobs, she tells me that the 2 girls in college that she'd kissed also went down on her. She also admits to kissing another girl about 6 months or so before we got married. She tells me that she never had feelings for any one of these girls, that she was sloppy drunk every time, and that she didn't enjoy any of these experiences. She tells me that she's been dying slowly inside since we've been married. She repeatedly tells me that she's worthless, that I don't deserve to be treated this way, and that she doesn't understand why I would stay with her. She tells me over and over that I deserve better. I'm holding her as she's sobbing into my shoulder, and I calmly thank her for being brave and telling me the truth. She tells me that this is the full truth and that there's nothing else. She kept sobbing almost uncontrollably like that for another 30 minutes or so. The whole time she had her face buried in her hands. She went to the bathroom to throw up and told me not to look at her face. She came back and did not eat any of the dinner that she had prepared. I ate dinner and turned on Family Guy as a brief reprieve for both of us. That night in bed, she's still sniffling. She asks me if she can touch me. I tell her no. At this point, the anger is welling up inside of me, and I begin to ask the tough questions. How could you tell me you love me then lie to me so much? How could you cheat on someone 4 different times and never tell him? She says that she was young, rebellious, and that deep down she's always felt that I was too good for her and as such has tried to sabotage our relationship. She admits that at one time she thought it was okay since she'd never cheated after we married, but that she has since realized that that was very wrong. She apologizes for hurting me, tells me she'd do anything to take my hurt away. So on, she offered to sleep on the couch. I told her that wasn't necessary. This morning she was very quiet. I could tell that she hadn't slept well. I hadn't either, or that she might have been crying some more. I could hear the lump in her throat all morning. When I kissed the top of her head as I was walking out the door to get on my bike, she almost started crying again. I couldn't bring myself to kiss her on the lips, so there's the story. Here's a little more background. My wife was 21 when we got married. I was 27, she's 23 now. I just turned 30. I realize now that, yes, she was too young, but we're 2 years into it now, and so that's a bit of a moot point. I don't necessarily want a divorce. But that decision will only come with time as I process all this information. Also, I've always known that she was bi-curious. That does not bother me in any way, shape, or form. I just never knew that she'd acted on it to the extent that she has. I do believe that my wife is sorry for her mistakes, and for not telling. I did not in any way get the impression that she was sorry only for getting caught, or that she was justified in her cheating. She very clearly knows it was wrong. I have never seen my wife cry like she did last night, nor so obviously filled with shame and guilt. My fear is that she is a serial cheater and that she will do all of this again. I don't know, she told me she's been presented with the opportunities but has always turned them down because of how badly she felt knowing how wrong she's already been. Yes, my wife has very severe boundary issues as well, of course. It's hard to trust her about anything at this point, and I'm well versed in the concept that cheaters lie, but after what I saw last night, I really do believe she's telling me the truth at this point. So, what are the thoughts? I love my wife and want to stay with her, but am now very gun-shy about opening up to her in any way. Edit for clarity. 2 of these acts occurred while we were dating. 2 occurred while we were engaged. This morning I find myself plagued with contradicting thoughts regarding my marriage. I've put a lot of work and a lot of myself into this marriage. I feel like I owe it to myself and to our marriage to see if we can stick it out. As such, I want to give her another chance. But what if she does it again? What if 5 years down the road I'm having divorce papers drawn up? I'll be 35 years old. We'll have a house by then, so we'll be in debt. I laid out to her this morning all of my conditions for giving it another shot. NC letters. All passwords. Access to all devices. Marriage counseling. No going out with friends. No drinking when I'm not around. Strict boundaries and understanding what kind of behavior is okay and isn't. Full ownership that her actions were not the result of drinking or peer pressure but her own poor choices. I also laid out exactly what I consider to be inappropriate behavior, just so there can never be any ambiguity. She was more than willing to submit to all of them. And she even offered to take tomorrow off so we could start marriage counseling. But I still feel like she's getting off too easy. She gets to stay married. We're still going to buy a house soon. She's been trying to get into veterinary school and she still gets that her parents don't know any of this happened. A part of me wonders if I'm being played. I don't get that feeling from her. Just doubts in my own mind. I told her this morning that giving her another chance would be an act of faith on my part. Part of me wonders, is that what marriage is supposed to be? Faith that is corroborated by trust, but verify. But then, what is marriage itself but a mutual act of faith between 2 people? When 2 people marry, they have absolutely no idea where life will take them. Man, this stuff is so tangled and jumbled up. I know that if I decide to stick this out, then it really is an act of faith on my part. I really do have to give her another chance. And I have to do it regardless of what fears of the future I may have. But that's a lot easier to type than it is to do. A little more background. I'm a former Marine and combat veteran of OIF. I was diagnosed with PTSD several years ago by multiple mental health professionals. As such, I'm very familiar with much of the post-traumatic symptoms, hypervigilance, flashbacks, that follow these things. The various support systems I have in place to deal with my PTSD has helped me deal with this. It is my military and combat experiences that have given me one of my guiding principles. Examine the facts as you know them, formulate a decision, execute that decision making adjustments where needed, and don't armchair quarterback yourself later. Just learn from any mistakes you made. I also fully understand the concept of going into the unknown with absolutely no guarantee that you'll make it out the other side, because this is such an emotionally charged situation. And because trust has been broken. The facts are sketchy at best, however. I feel like I have the best grasp on them that I'm going to get. I genuinely feel like she is sorry and that she truly wants another chance. She said she wants to prove to me that she can be the wife that I deserve so that we can grow old together. She told me yesterday how much of a better person I make her. Could be flowery talk to throw me off the trail. But I honestly don't think so. As such, while I understand the viewpoints of many of you who say I need to cut my losses now, I truly feel that I owe it to myself and our marriage to give her another shot. That's the route I'm going to go. I accept that it's an act of faith fraught with danger and the possibility of failure. But what worthwhile isn't, really? Other than all the trust but verify stuff, What are some other steps that we can take to maximize our chance of success and move past all this? It's a super long and complicated story. Short version is this. Other man and I became friends many years ago. Prob 16 years ago at this point, long before I met my wife, which was only 6 years ago, Other man and I became friends. Not best friends, but still close. Fast forward to 6 years ago, I had been home from Iraq for a year. Another man introduced me to the woman that would become my wife. From the get-go, his wife, the OMW in my previous posts, had suspicions of his intentions, but ignores them. My wife and I meet, begin dating, and we all four become very close. Me and Other man become best friends, and my wife and OMW become like sisters. Other man and I start working out together 3 times a week. We all double date once a week, etc. Suddenly and mysteriously, Other man, who is still my very close friend at this point, begins acting very mentally unstable. This is around the time my wife and I got married. Over the next few months, the mutual friendships completely implode and Other man and OMW move away. A year later is when I find evidence on FB that Other man had been trying to have an affair with my wife. The evidence very clearly showed that my wife did not return his feelings, and other than the hot tub incident, there was no evidence that anything physical had ever happened. And rest assured that I cross-referenced those FB messages with emails and text messages. The only thing I didn't do was inform OMW, which I should have, that my wife did not rebuff him and shut him down, combined with the fact that she hid the whole thing from me, caused the first D-Day about a year after we married. Of course, I realize now why he suddenly became so mentally unstable. He had been pursuing my wife behind my back, which my wife did not tell me. Once we got married, he realized he'd never get her, and so began his slide into further mental instability. This week when he contacted my wife again, I finally called OMW and told her the full story. She served him divorce papers yesterday. Like I said, it's a very complicated story. My wife understands now that by not rebuffing him clearly and completely, she led him on, which exacerbated these problems and caused a lot of damage. A bit more than 1 year later, the story starts way back in '96 when I was a freshman in HS. I met an English teacher, Jay, who had just graduated college and was therefore very young, 22 or 23. He and his wife, M, became the Sunday school teachers at the church I attended. My friends and I used to hang at his house all the time. He would offer advice and guidance. It was a relationship I treasured. Fast forward 10 years to 2006. I joined the Marine Corps Reserve as a machine gunner while in college and had come home from Iraq a year prior. I had stayed in touch with Jay over the years. One day he emailed me a picture of a young former student of his that he thought would be a great match for me. This was the woman who would one day become my W. Needless to say, my W and I hit it off, and we eventually became very close friends with J and M. We all four spent a lot of time with together. I still look at this time of our lives very fondly. As my W and I became more serious and I proposed, we all noticed that Jay's behavior was becoming very erratic. He relapsed into drugs and alcohol, things he'd given up for the church. His behavior worsened to the point that we stopped hanging out with J and M altogether. Things came to a head only a few days before the wedding when W and I had a huge falling out with J and M. This was in September 2009. Fast forward to around Feb 2010, my W has been going out on girls' night out at a steady rate, 2 to 3 times per month. I become suspicious that she's cheating. While I find no evidence that she cheated, I also found love letters from J to my W dated the months leading up to our wedding. Suddenly everything in my mind clicked. Somewhere along the way J had fallen in love with my W. That explained why his behavior became so erratic the closer the wedding drew. For my W's part, she had stopped responding to him once the correspondences became overtly romantic, however. She never told me about them, nor had she outright told him to stop, regardless. The revelation of my friend's treachery was a huge shock to me. I'd been friends with J going on 15 years. I confronted W about the whole thing but did not call me to tell her about J. His behavior had become so erratic that I just wanted him out of our lives altogether. I was afraid that telling him would antagonize Jay and have him show up at my door. Being a combat veteran, I still to this day sleep with a weapon next to my bed. I wanted to avoid any sort of confrontation with Jay that might result in legal trouble. All this is what I consider the first D-Day. Fast forward about a year to January 2012, we haven't heard from Jay. Out of nowhere, he starts texting and emailing harassing messages to W and me. I ignore it for a week or so, but when it doesn't stop, I eventually decide it's time to do what I should have done in the first place. I called M. M is heartbroken but not surprised. That's when she tells me the first shocker. She'd left him a few months prior because he'd been stealing her medications and had even begun to display signs of aggression toward her. M had subsequently moved in with her sister several states away and was trying to decide between D or R. My call pushed her to D. She then drops the second bomb. She tells me that she and my W had been intimate when my W and I were engaged. I was dumbstruck. So that night I confronted my W. This was the second D day. And it lasted for 2 weeks. As it turns out, that sleeping with M was only the tip of the iceberg. After dragging all of the truth out of my W, we immediately started MC and IC for her. We were also reading books together, bonding like crazy, and having more bonding than we'd ever had as a married couple. My W severed ties with all of the toxic friends she'd had during her serial cheating. She was very obviously remorseful. During this time, Jay is still texting, emailing us. In these texts and emails, Jay begins taunting me about how he knew we had bonding with M. He also inadvertently admits that he and W had never had sex, just as my W had originally claimed. As he continues harassing us, he continues corroborating several of the other things my W had told me. Fate is one messed up mistress, I guess. As such, I never truly felt the need to do any kind of poly on W. J and M's divorce went through pretty quickly once their D was final. We stopped hearing from Jay and haven't heard from him since. That brings us to right now. As I mentioned in this thread, my W had been accepted into veterinary school, an opportunity for which we would have to move across the state. I decided that I wanted to move irrespective of her opportunity because the job situation where we were living sucked. So, in April, right after I started this thread, we moved to Baton Rouge. She started school and I found a new job with double the pay and none of the stress of my previous job. What about reconciliation? It's been a very difficult journey. Once the initial intense bonding eased, I began to look at everything more objectively. The first thing for me was getting to a point where I could leave my W if I so chose. I didn't want to stay with her out of fear or anything else. It had to be a choice. Getting to where I could make that choice was no easy feat. The next difficult thing was realizing very clearly that my W had lied to me about the cheating because she'd known that I would not have married her had I known. As such, I'd made the decision based on incomplete information. I struggled with that for a very, very long time. I've also struggled at times with the idea of consequences. One of the most bizarre things about being a BS is that if you decide to R, ultimately the WS gets to have everything they wanted. They got to have their fun but keep the marriage. That bothered me for a very long time. There were some very low points. I hated my W at times. I hated our marriage. I was so resentful of her, of our marriage, of my being young, good-looking, and successful, yet also tied down to this cheating woman. My W did all the right things. She told me anything I wanted to know. She still texts me everywhere she goes, lets me read her emails, Facebook, texts, stays in contact with me all throughout the day. Some days all that stuff helped me feel better. Most days they didn't. So why didn't I leave her? Because I had to know, I had to know that I'd given our marriage a chance. As a result, our marriage is at a far better place. That's not saying a whole lot. Our marriage was stalled and marred from the start, however. Every day I'm just a little gladder that I stayed. I still don't trust her enough to tell her some things. Before I knew about the cheating, my W was one of only about 3 people outside of my war buddies that I could talk to about Iraq. I don't talk to her about it now. That notwithstanding, we're doing very well, all things considered. I tell W all the time that she put me through enough drama in the first 3 years of marriage to last us the next 10. And she lives by that now. Story 2. We have been married for 5 years after a relatively short courtship. 60 days after we were married, she had to be hospitalized for 2 weeks with a mixed-stated mania. She was diagnosed with bipolar I. My instincts were to leave, but I went looking for answers. I searched my soul and decided that even with the illness, I was going to try my best to support her. The next several years were a little blurred with different doctors, meds and such. Finally, we got her stable enough to take care of herself and even teach on the college level, and I felt like we were on our way to a life. But, as time goes on, things are just getting worse. Not in terms of mania, depression, but just severe dysfunction. I can find no common ground and ultimately, I am accused of not doing anything for her at all, which hurts because, let me tell you, I try as hard as I can. The harder I try to do things or help her, the more viscous she gets. It's mind-boggling. Whatever I do, it's wrong. She manufactures this reality that I don't support her, but I can honestly say that I would be embarrassed to admit some of the things I have agreed to in order to be supportive. My feelings and emotions have been trampled, and there is nothing I can count on in this marriage. I feel so alone. I do have a very supportive, loving family, but now she is attacking that on all fronts, and it is shaking me to my core. I have lost all love, compassion I feel for her and find it hard to even look at her. Okay, with all that said, why do I find it so hard to leave? She pushes me so far beyond my limits and I say to myself, that's it. I can't take this anymore. But just as soon as I think about it, I feel almost crippled, like I can't leave. I make excuses like Christmas is coming, we have a vacation planned, I just can't leave now, etc. Then I say to myself that if she pushes me again though, I'm out. Well, she does, but the next time is the same, she pushes and I shut down. I know that it is fear. But why do I care? I mean, she treats me horribly. Why do I care what happens to her after I leave? I apologize for the length of this post, but just another couple details. We have no kids, are in our mid-30s and both educated. I know that my life will get better when I leave my wife, and I also know hers will get worse. I keep getting stuck in the reason trap, trying to figure this out, but there is no figuring. It just sucks. I think what I feel most days is shock that this is happening. I even have a tendency to talk myself out of it while I am at work just to come home and be slapped in the face with reality. I also have fear that I will cave. If I leave and she can't take care of herself, will I be able to handle that? I mean, if I come back then, it would be disastrous and I would be trapped forever. But how am I going to make it, watching the person I made vows to spin down to their own destruction? I know that it is not my fault, but I can't get away from that. The past 5 days have been an eye-opener, but not exactly in the terms I was looking for. I learned some things about myself this week that shook me up a bit, and I think it is going to take some time to sort out. In so many words, I really need to find out whether my feelings for her are truly love or extreme codependence. The short story is that I left for an evening and went to my parents while she was at work. I left no note and shut off my phone. I made it to about 5 the next day before I contacted her, and by that evening, I was back home. For my part, the feelings I felt were horrible, but what made matters worse is how my family reacted. She tried calling one of my sisters, then stopped by my parents during the day while I wasn't there. They did not treat her very well, from their own accounts and hers. All she was wanting to know was where I was and why had I left, and they had their defensive guards up as if she showed up with a ball bat. Things were said by my family that shouldn't have been said, or even known. They acted way out of their character, and I couldn't believe it. But then something occurred to me that hadn't before. It goes back to when she was hospitalized after our marriage. For those of you who know, helping someone recover from a severe manic episode is beyond words. Not to even speak of what it is like for the person suffering for the episode. During that time, I developed a coping mechanism that I didn't realize its severity until this week. Since I did not want to do or say anything that would push her back into an episode, I stopped talking, for the most part, to her about what I felt were hard emotional subjects. I had meetings with family and friends and asked that they not talk about certain things with her. For myself, when things in the relationship got hard, I would swallow it for the time being, then go and visit my sister, let's say, and unload. Then I would go home calm and things would be okay for a while. That probably would have been okay. For a short period, my family is strong, and it helped me. However, over the past 5 years I have taken it to a severe level and am almost constantly venting about the relationship to mostly family and one set of close friends. What has this done? I have been living the pain, hurt of this relationship without communicating it to the person that needs to hear it, while at the same time alienating family and friends from my wife. I would continue to get upset about some of her issues, but never really express to her how strongly I feel about them. But in my mind, I felt like I had, because I had completely unloaded about them in other company. While right now, I feel like I have done some damage to our relationship and feel horrible about it. I am only human and am also happy that I see it. My wife and I are starting to counsel this next week and we have talked about the above. I also want to say that I realize my codependent self may just be finding another reason to blame myself. But right now I feel I need to come clean on these issues with her, whether I feel like she can handle it or not. Maybe my fears of her losing it when she hears how I feel will lead to healing. I don't know, but I hope at the minimum, if I leave again, she will at least understand why. She does admit the illness and has not denied or refused her medication since her hospitalization. I should also note that she does not have any substance abuse issues. Thank God. Treatment is a little tough because of our wonderful healthcare issues. We fall between a literal crack in the system where I cannot get healthcare for her that covers mental health issues. So ultimately, her doctor sees her once a month for a med check. By the time we pay for meds out of pocket, we don't have enough money to pay for therapy, health insurance. It is denying us the exact treatment she needs. We are going to marriage counseling soon, and after some of what I posted earlier, I realize now that I need some help as well. I thought I was super tough and able to handle it, but it has made mincemeat of me. As far as what I want. In a bubble. I want her and me to be happy together. I love her, I do have joy in my life, and I don't feel that there are any life goals that I want that are limited by the situation. If she is willing, however. We don't live in the bubble, and I need to find out how far she is willing to go with me. My personal diagnosis of her is that she is BPD as well as bipolar I. I have read quite a bit about bipolar, and while the mood swings make sense and the decompensation while she is cycling, there are mannerisms, tendencies that simply are not explained by bipolar. This led me to BPD, although I have never said it, and like Uptown said, the doctor hasn't said it either. I do need to read more about BPD for my own benefit, because there are times when she can be so vicious or absolutely nasty. An example of this is that in the past year, I have lost 2 close loved ones. Within an hour of finding out of their passing, she has instigated arguments about other issues. It was staggering and very hard to deal with, needless to say. The dysfunction ranges from just plain hurtful things like that, to like you are dealing with the most spoiled 4-year-old on coke with an aggression issue. This is not present all the time, but it rears its ugly head. And as some of you know, it is when you least expect it. I have been dealing with, or not dealing, this situation by venting and worrying, and it has not helped because I was not doing it in the right place. I need to speak with a counselor now that I have identified, with the help of Uptown, that I am very much a caregiver. I am starting to understand, but work needs to be done. As far as my family, Christmas is coming and I am nervous about possible conflicts, arguments and their consequences. But I am putting it up to God. Not to say that I am going to sit idly by while confrontations happen, but at least I am not going to try to quarterback the situation. It is as it is, for my part. I have apologized. I know my heart is in the right place, a work in progress. My comment: what do you guys learn from this? If your partner cheated before your marriage, do you stay or leave? I think it depends on if the person has remorse or not, and it takes time to prove that, however. Sometimes the easier route is just to leave, especially if you don't have kids yet. You agree? Tell me how you decide.